The city did not know what it was holding. That is the thing about cities. They contain every kind of reckoning and they do not register any of them. The neon was on. The streets were full of people going toward whatever ordinary thing was next, and in a penthouse 34 floors above all of it, a woman stood at a kitchen window and looked at the reflection of the room behind her and understood, with the cold, clean certainty she had been building toward since the moment Ji Yan-han placed a photograph in her hands on a morning pavement, that the next 24 hours were going to decide everything. Not just whether truth survived, whether the people who had buried it for 5 years were going to be allowed to go on living as though they had not. She pressed her hand harder against the cold glass. She felt the city through it, alive and indifferent and enormous, and she thought, So-yeon deserved more than a filing. She deserved the room to shake. She looked at the 2 photographs beside the lamp. Her father, So-yeon, both of them laughing at things off camera, existing in the specific brightness of people who had no idea they were being preserved. She pressed 2 fingers to her sternum, one breath, then another, the way her father had taught her when she was 9 years old and the world had gotten loud. Find the ground, Zara. It is always still underneath the noise. She found it. She picked up her coat. But before we go there, welcome back to Neon and Gold Stories. If you are joining us for the first time, I am begging you, go back, watch every single part in order, because what is about to happen in this final chapter carries the weight of everything that came before it. If you have been here from the beginning, if you have traveled from the moment a grandmother said, "Come now," to the moment 2 identical hands rested beside each other on a plain table and did not touch, then you know how much has been carried, and how far, and by how many people. The filing was not the end. It was the door, and in Part 5, we find out what was waiting on the other side. Subscribe, like this video, drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, and hold on, because in the next hour, everything changes. Oh Soo-kyung called at 4 in the morning. Zara was already awake. She had been awake since 2, the particular wakefulness of a woman whose body understood before the phone rang that the night was not finished with her yet. She answered before the second ring. The surveillance came through, Oh Soo-kyung said, without preamble, in the voice of a woman who had also not slept and did not require sympathy for it. The security contact I have at the prosecutor's office called an hour ago. They pulled the footage from So-yeon's building, the original footage, not the version the police received 5 years ago. Zara sat up. They were different? Substantially. A pause carrying enormous weight. The version submitted to the police had 11 minutes removed. 11 minutes beginning at the timestamp that placed So-hyun entering the building at 9:47 p.m., wearing a coat that since has been confirmed through fibers collected from So-yeon's apartment and preserved in a private evidence file Ji-yeon's contact maintained for 5 years, as the coat So-hyun owned at the time. Oh Soo-kyung stopped. Then, and it shows him leaving at 11:22, alone. The silence on the line was the silence of 2 women understanding that what they had was no longer circumstantial. What they had was primary evidence. The 5-year wall of apparent suicide had just developed a crack so significant that no amount of legal architecture was going to plaster over it.
Does Sejun know? Zara said. Not yet. I'm calling him next. A beat. I wanted to call you first. Zara understood why. She put her feet on the floor. Call him, she said. I'll be ready. She dressed in 4 minutes. She moved through the penthouse with the deliberate quiet of a woman who has decided what she is going to do and is in the act of preparing to do it. She stopped at the kitchen counter and looked at the 2 photographs propped against the lamp. So-yeon laughing at a table with a cup of tea, her father's wide smile. She looked at them for 1 moment, just one. Now, she said to them, to the room, to the specific frequency of attention that people direct toward the dead when they need permission to do something enormous. It's now. Sejin was already in the hallway when she came out, dressed, phone in hand, face carrying the cold, focused clarity of a man who has decided what he is going to do and is no longer in any internal conflict about it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You heard," she said. "I heard." He looked at his phone, then at her. "There is something else. While Oh Soo-kyung was on the phone with me, my security team sent a notification. The man outside, Daejung's surveillance operative, is not the only one. There are 2 others, rotating positions at the service entrance and across the street. They have been documenting everyone who comes and goes from this building for 3 weeks. His jaw tightened. They know about Ji-yeon's visit. They know about the cafe. They have been building their own picture of what we have been assembling. They know the filing is coming." He met her eyes directly. "Which means Daejung has known about it since before we submitted it." Zara looked at him. "He's going to run." "He has a private jet registered in 3 different names," Sejin said. "I found this out 40 minutes ago. The jet filed a flight plan 6 hours ago to a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty." He looked at the window. The city below them, still dark and alive and indifferent. If he boards that plane before the prosecutor's office acts on what Oh Soo-kyung has just sent them, the case survives on paper and dies in practice. He spends the rest of his life in a country that does not send him back. The corporation restructures, the documentation is contested from a distance. Park Jin-ho recants. Se-yeon's testimony becomes uncorroborated. He stopped. And So-yeon becomes a footnote again. The word sat in the room between them like something physical. "When is the flight?" Zara said. 7 a.m. He looked at his watch. It was 4:43. 2 hours and 17 minutes. She looked at him, he looked at her. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, because it didn't need to be said, it needed to be done. She picked up her bag. The prosecutor's office at 5 in the morning had the specific quality of institutional buildings in the early hours, all fluorescent corridors and the distant sound of someone's coffee machine, and the low hum of a system that does not sleep even when the people inside it are trying to. Oh Soo-kyung was already there. She stood in the corridor outside a frosted glass door with a sealed document case and the expression of a woman who had been in this building before, at this hour, for this kind of case, and who understood with complete clarity that what happened in the next 90 minutes would determine whether the next 5 years looked like the last 5 or like something else entirely. The prosecutor was a woman named Yoon Jae-kyung, 53. Small, with the precise and unhurried bearing of someone who had been offered and refused positions at 3 international firms, and who had stayed where she was because she believed specifically and without sentiment that the work she did here was not replaceable by people who had left. She had received Oh Soo-kyung's documents at 3 in the morning. She had been in her office since 3:15. She looked at Sejin across her desk and said, without introduction, "You understand that what you have submitted implicates a member of your own family in a homicide that was closed as suicide 5 years ago." "Yes," he said. "And you understand that pursuing this will not be clean or quick or private." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment with the evaluating eyes of a woman who has sat across from a great many powerful people and has learned to read the difference between the ones who want justice and the ones who want a particular outcome they are calling justice. She seemed to come to some conclusion about which kind he was. She turned to the document on her desk. She said, "The footage is admissible. The fiber analysis is admissible. The recordings are admissible. The access log, the signed statement, the cooperation testimony from Park Jin-ho," she pressed her lips together. "This is a substantial case, not airtight, but substantial." A pause. "The issue is the flight plan." 2 hours and 4 minutes, Oh Soo-kyung said. Prosecutor Yoon looked at the clock. She looked at the documents. She looked at Se-jin and then at Zara, who sat in the corner of the room and said nothing, but whose presence was being registered with the precision of a woman who noticed everything in her rooms. Then Prosecutor Yoon picked up her phone and made a call in clipped, rapid Korean that lasted under 90 seconds.
When she set the phone down, her expression had not changed at all, which Zara was beginning to understand was what decisive action looked like on a person who had been performing it for 30 years. "The airport is being contacted," she said. "The flight plan will be flagged. This is not an arrest, not yet. It is a hold pending the issue of a warrant, which I am preparing now." She looked at Se-jin. "If your uncle attempts to board that aircraft, he will be detained for questioning. If he does not attempt to board, he will be served at his residence within the hour." Se-jin was very still. "Either way," Prosecutor Yoon said, "Kwon Dae-jung is not leaving this city today." Zara did not know she had been holding her breath until she let it out. The corridor outside Prosecutor Yoon's office was all fluorescent white and distant footsteps and the specific quality of 4:59 in the morning in a building full of people doing necessary things. She stood with her back against the wall and pressed her thumbnail against the inside of her wrist, the small private signal, the one that moved her from feeling into functioning and back again, and she breathed. Se-jin came out behind her. He stood beside her. He looked at the corridor. "She's fast," she said. "She is the best prosecutor in this city," he said. "My grandmother hired her once, years ago. She refused the case because she believed my grandmother was wrong." He paused. "My grandmother said it was the most respect anyone had ever shown her." Zara looked at him. He was looking at the middle distance with an expression she couldn't fully read. Part weight, part the particular quality of a man standing at the edge of something enormous and irrevocable that he set in motion himself, watching it move. "Are you all right?" she said. He turned to look at her. "No, but I'm certain, which is better." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "it is." Oh Soo-kyung appeared at the doorway. "The warrant for Dae-jung's residence will be issued in 40 minutes. The airport hold is confirmed." She looked at Se-jin. "His legal team has already attempted to contest the hold." She paused. Prosecutor Yoon declined to hear the contest at this time. Something moved through Se-jin's expression. Not triumph, the opposite of triumph. The complicated, heavy thing that happens when you have done a necessary thing that has cost you your family's coherence and the version of your history you had been telling yourself, and you are standing on the far side of it, and it is correct, and it is also one of the most painful things you have ever done. "Thank you," he said to Oh Soo-kyung, "for 30 years of this." Oh Soo-kyung looked at him with the eyes of a woman who has known him since before he had any armor. "She would have been proud of you," she said. "She was always proud of you. She just didn't know how to say it in a language you could receive." She reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the counter beside her. Cream, unsealed, his name on the front in handwriting he knew. "She left this with me. She asked me not to give it to you until this was done, until you had found the truth by your own means without her." She paused. "She said she needed you to know you were capable of it." He took the letter, he held it for a long moment, then he placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, flat against his chest, next to his heart, in the specific way of someone storing something they are not yet ready to open but are no longer willing to leave behind. He was not going to open it in a fluorescent corridor at 5 in the morning. He was going to open it when he was ready, but he was not going to leave it on a counter. At 6:17 a.m., Kwon Dae-jung arrived at the private terminal of Gimpo Airport in the back of a black car with 2 aides and a legal representative already on her phone. He was dressed for travel. He moved with the practiced calm of a man who had navigated difficult situations for decades, and who believed, as powerful men often believe, that the structure which had protected him this long would continue to find a way to protect him now. He was 3 steps from the aircraft stairs when the airport security officer stepped forward. Not aggressively, not dramatically, with the quiet, implacable courtesy of institutional authority that does not need drama because it has the weight of the law behind it and knows it. "Mr. Kwon, I am required to inform you that your departure has been held pending a warrant from the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. "You are not under arrest at this time. You are requested to accompany us to a secure room while the situation is clarified." Dae-jung looked at the officer. He looked at the aircraft, steps extended, crew visible in the cabin doorway. He looked at his legal representative, who had gone very still on her phone. And then he looked past all of them at the terminal glass and saw something he had not expected. Not the prosecutor's officers, who he had anticipated, not his legal team, but a face, through the glass, watching. His nephew. Se-jin stood on the other side of the terminal glass in a dark jacket with his hands in his pockets and his expression carrying nothing except absolute, complete certainty. He was not aggressive, he was not performing, he was simply present in the way that a person is present when they have decided something permanently and are standing inside that decision without any ambivalence left. Beside him, a young woman, deep brown skin, natural hair, fitted coat, who was looking at Dae-jung through the glass with the expression of someone who has been carrying a specific grief for a very long time and is watching the first, concrete, institutional, irrevocable step toward the world acknowledging that grief as justified. Dae-jung looked at his nephew for a long moment. The nephew looked back. He did not move. He did not speak. He was simply there, standing inside the irrefutable fact of what had been filed, what had been found, what could not now be retracted, and there was nothing in his face except the quiet, permanent certainty of a man who has done the right thing and is willing to stand in the room with the cost of it. Dae-jung looked at his legal representative. He said something in a low voice. She replied. He said something else. Then he set down his travel bag, and he walked into the secure room. The aircraft door closed. The stairs were withdrawn. The plane that had been going somewhere with no extradition treaty went nowhere. And through the terminal glass, Se-jin watched until the door of the secure room was shut. Then he exhaled once, just once, not with relief, with the weighted breath of a man who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and has just placed it, correctly, in the hands of people whose job it is to carry it from here. He turned to Zara. She was already looking at him. "It's done," she said. "It's started," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him carefully. "I know. But it started, and that's the part he thought would never happen." At 9:14 that same morning, the arrest warrant was executed at Kwon Dae-jung's residence in Songbukdong. He was eating breakfast when the cars arrived, 3 of them, plain black, no markings, which is in its own way more final than marked vehicles, because marked vehicles can still be argued with, and plain black cars cannot. His housekeeper opened the door. The officer in charge introduced herself by rank and name and handed the warrant to Kwon Dae-jung's legal representative, who had been called at 8:43 and had arrived at 9:07, and was reading it now with the expression of a lawyer reading a document that is substantially better constructed than she had been led to expect. Kwon Dae-jung sat at the head of his breakfast table and looked at the warrant across the room and did not stand immediately. He was 61 years old. He had been in this city's boardrooms and backrooms since his 20s. He had survived 3 board restructurings, 2 governance investigations, and the particular quiet violence of a family's internal politics for longer than most men could have managed. He was not, even now, a man who panicked. He was, however, a man who was calculating, and the calculation was not going well. "Mr. Kwon," the officer's voice was entirely courteous. "The warrant covers conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice in the matter of Han Soyan's death investigation, and falsification of evidence submitted to the Seoul Metropolitan Police in that matter. You are under arrest." A pause. "You are advised to accompany us without resistance." Dae-jung looked at his legal representative. She gave him the smallest nod, the nod that means, "Do not make this worse." He had known her for 17 years. He understood her nods. He stood. He set his napkin beside his plate. He looked briefly at the room around him, the room of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person in it, and he seemed to understand in that moment, with the clarity that arrives only when the calculation is finally and completely done, that this was the last morning this room was going to be his in any ordinary way. He said nothing. He walked out of his house. His statement at the formal intake was, "No comment." It was the statement of a man who has handed his situation to his lawyers entirely and intends to maintain that handoff for as long as the law allows. He sat in the processing room with the stillness of someone applying enormous internal control, and he looked at the wall, and he said nothing further. The charges were read to him in full. He did not change expression at any of them, not at conspiracy to commit murder, not at obstruction of justice, not at falsification of evidence. He had been in rooms with bad news for 40 years, and he had learned to receive it with his face entirely closed, which is the last available dignity of a man whose other dignities have been removed. When the formal processing was complete and he was moved to a holding room to await his counsel's preparation of a response, he sat alone for the first time. He sat with his hands flat on the table. He thought about the flight plan. He thought about the jet bridge. He thought about his nephew standing on the other side of the terminal glass with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who had decided something permanently. He had spent 5 years believing that the particular configuration of people who knew the truth, a dead woman's sister, a family lawyer, a recording device, a grieving brother who had never looked at him with anything except the managed calm of a man who did not yet know what he knew, was containable. That the architecture of the cover, the forged note, the edited footage, the closed investigation, was sufficient. He had not accounted for Zara Mensah. He had not accounted for what it does to a man when someone stands beside him in every room the truth requires him to stand in and does not leave. He sat with that for a long time.
Park Jin-ho surrendered himself to the prosecutor's office at 11:22 a.m., with his counsel, having been contacted at 9:05 with the news of Dae-jung's arrest and the scope of the filed charges against him personally. He arrived with a document already prepared, a cooperation statement, 3 pages, precise and complete, covering his role in full, the network blackout in Tokyo, the call he made to ensure the original police investigation was closed before it reached the biometric irregularities, the access he provided to the surveillance system from which the 11 minutes of footage were removed, the specific date on which he made the call to Dae-jung's assistant confirming the deletion was complete. He was not the architect. He had always known he was not the architect. He had been the instrument, precise and efficient and entirely willing in the moment because he had been Jin-ho before he was anyone's instrument, and the version of himself that had said yes to each step was a man who had believed, somehow, in each step individually, and had not looked at the full shape of what the steps made until he was too far inside it to see the edges. He sat across from the intake officer, and he submitted the cooperation statement without being asked. He placed it on the table himself. "I understand the charges against me," he said. "I am not contesting them. I am submitting this in full cooperation, and I will answer any questions the prosecutor requires." The intake officer looked at the statement. She looked at him. She picked up the statement and read the first page without expression. "You understand," she said, "that this statement implicates you directly in the obstruction of a homicide investigation." "Yes," he said, "and that cooperation does not guarantee leniency." "I know," he said, "that is not why I am submitting it." She looked at him for a moment.
She did not ask why he was submitting it. She did not need to. It was in the document, not in any single line of it, but in the fact of it. The fact of a man who had spent 5 years holding a specific and irrevocable thing and who had finally, correctly, placed it where it needed to go. The charges against Park Jin-ho were falsification of evidence, obstruction of justice, criminal conspiracy. He received them without expression. He signed the acknowledgement form in the specific way of a man who has decided to be accountable and intends to carry that decision all the way to its end, wherever the end was. Se-hyun Kwon was brought in for formal questioning at 10:45 the same morning. He arrived with his counsel, having been contacted at 9:30 and having said to his counsel on the phone, "I will come in voluntarily. I do not require a warrant. I have been waiting for this room for 5 years." He sat down across from the recording device, and he looked at his hands for a long moment. Se-jung's hands, worn differently, the hands that had been in that apartment, the hands that shared every physical characteristic of his brother's hands, except the things that could not be shared, the 5 years of carrying it, the specific and private weight of a man who knows what he has done and has been living with that knowledge in every room he has entered since. The recording device's red light came on. He looked up. He spoke for 4 hours. He did not omit anything. He went back to the beginning, all the way back, further than they asked, because the beginning was necessary to understand the shape of the thing, the displacement, the 9 years of watching his brother inhabit a life that had been dissuaded his, the specific and terrible love that had curdled into something he had no clean name for, but which had required eventually a place to go. He described Dae-jung approaching him, the proposal, framed as business necessity, framed as protection of the family, framed in every way except the way that it actually was. He described the way he had moved through each step, telling himself each step was the last one, that passing information was different from acting on it. He described the apartment. He described the coat he had worn, the entrance at building at 9:47, the lift, the floor, the specific quality of the hallway, ordinary, quiet, the kind of hallway that exists in thousands of buildings in this city and does not know what it is holding on any given night. He described So-hyun opening the door. Here he stopped for a moment, not to manage himself, to be accurate, to give the account she deserved, which was the full account, which did not soften the thing she had been owed for 5 years. The warmth on her face when the door opened, the specific quality of her expression, the relief of someone who had been waiting, who had hoped the person she loved would finally come to her. She said, "I knew you would come." She had stepped back to let him in. She had put the kettle on before he had even crossed the threshold, because that was who she was, precise and warm, and already thinking about what the other person needed before they asked for it. She always knew the difference between the brothers. She had documented it for months. The biometric irregularities, the unauthorized access, the pattern of a man using his brother's identity to move through spaces he had not been invited into. She had built the record carefully, the way she built everything, with the precision of a woman who understood that the truth was only useful if it was irrefutable. She had been building a case. She was not confused when she opened that door.
I would like to give a summary of everything to the end. The night of the apartment. So-hyun Han, a young woman who had been building documentation against powerful men, answered her door knowing something was wrong. Kwon Se-hyun, identical twin of her lover Se-jin, had come with a purpose. Kwon Dae-jung had ordered her death, staged as suicide. He had a tasteless compound to put in her tea. She would be made to look overwhelmed, a young woman who had taken her own life. No one would investigate too hard. So-hyun knew all of this. She had started a recording device on the kitchen shelves before she opened the door. She listened to his full explanation with her hands around her teacup and her face completely still.
She told him she had already filed copies everywhere, that her sister Ji-yeon had copies, that it wouldn't end with her. He knew the calculation was that a dead woman's documentation, without her to press it, could be managed. Ji-yeon could be discouraged. The files could be dismissed. So-yeon pushed the teacup toward him anyway. He put the compound in it. She drank it herself, waited until he stepped back so her death would look like a choice. She held the cup the way she always held tea, with both hands. She set it down. She looked at him and said, "I hope he finds out. I hope someone makes sure he finds out." Se-yeon stayed until she was unconscious, arranged the room, and picked up the recording device from the shelf without checking it. He hadn't noticed the red light. He missed the hard drive she'd already copied everything to, and a second copy she'd posted to Ji-yeon in an envelope labeled "Do not open unless." He sat at her desk and wrote a suicide note in handwriting identical to Se-jin's, because identical twins share identical handwriting. Then he left. He stood in a street looking at his hands and understood he had become something that could not be undone. 5 years later, Ji-yeon Han had been carrying her sister's hard drive on a chain around her neck. She traveled 200 miles to a stranger in a cafe, Zara Mensa, and handed it over. Zara, who was in an arranged marriage with Se-jin, organized by his dying grandmother, Kwon Soo-ja, who had known about the murder for 3 years and arranged the marriage to make sure Se-jin wouldn't be alone when the truth came out, worked with prosecutor Oh Soo-kyung to build the case. Se-yeon turned himself in voluntarily. He gave a 4-hour testimony omitting nothing: the compound, the tea, the note, Park Jin-ho arranging a network blackout in Tokyo so Se-jin couldn't be reached when So-yeon tried to call him, the 11:46 call confirming it was done. He described every detail. The recording held all of it. The charges. Filed at 4:47 p.m. Kwon Dae-jung, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, falsification of evidence, abuse of corporate authority. Park Jin-ho, falsification of evidence, obstruction of justice, criminal conspiracy, cooperation accepted, instrument not architect. Kwon Se-yeon, murder, first degree. Oh Soo-kyung called Zara with each charge individually as it was filed. Se-jin stood at the penthouse window when the last call came. When Zara told him it was filed, he turned from his reflection, the version of himself built around 5 years of silence, and said, "It's filed." Ji-yeon, who had been waiting in a hotel room with her bags packed, learned Dae-jung had been arrested at the airport. She said she was right. She documented everything. She left the right things in the right places for the right people. She stayed in the city so her sister wouldn't be alone in it. What came after? Oh Soo-kyung revealed that Se-jin's grandmother had known about the murder for 3 years. She had hired investigators, confirmed what happened, and then, instead of reporting it, arranged the marriage to Zara. She needed Se-jin to find the truth by his own means. She needed him to know he was capable of it without her. She left him a letter which he read alone and never fully disclosed. He told Zara only this. She wrote that Zara Mensa was the first decision she had ever made about him that she was completely certain of. 6 weeks after the case went public, Se-jin brought Zara to a small restaurant by the Han River. Se-yeon was there. He told Zara the last thing So-yeon had said in the final recording. "I hope whoever loves him after me knows how to find him in the dark. I hope she's stubborn enough to stay." Then Oh Soo-kyung called. Bail denied for both Dae-jung and Se-yeon. Trial date set, 8 months out. Charges standing as filed. Se-yeon received it with his hands flat on the table and said, "Yes, that is what it should be." Ji-yeon flew home to Busan, the hard drive finally at rest. Oh Soo-kyung walked out of the courthouse with the sealed document. Se-jin and Zara sat at a river table, her hand over his, the phone face down on the formica, the trial coming. So-yeon Han's voice is in the permanent record of the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. She set the room in motion from her kitchen with a recording device and a red light. The charges have her name in them. The machinery is moving, and it is not going to stop. I hope someone makes sure he finds out. Someone did.